like to introduce Mrs. Andrea Bell Myers. She's the founder of the Sankofa Community Academy. She is definitely a proud UW-Milwaukee and UW-Parkside graduate. Andrea and I met through work that we were doing in the 21st century teacher preparation um, project with UW-Parkside, which at the time was intending to and did create a community-focused teacher preparation and development program for the entire southeast section of Wisconsin, and the program is still in place today. But it's through that Andrea talked to me about her vision for Sankofa, and 4 years ago had that fateful meeting in the Kenosha Library where we all said, yes, we will do this. So Andrea, I turn this over to you.
Thank you, Maureen. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first Sankofa Summit. The Sankofa Summit is full of powerful action. Hi, I'm Andrea Bell Myers, founder of the Sankofa Community Academy. And as Maureen said, I began this journey in 2017 by literally picking up the phone and calling the Department of Public Instruction after another disappointing data staff meeting revealing the achievement gap of Black and Brown students was further widening. We today wish to alleviate and dismantle an inherited system. The systems that we've inherited contribute to inequity. They were conceived and grounded in systematic bias and both implicit and explicit racism that has been present in our society since the founding of our nation. Healing, equity, justice, and liberation is what a culturally responsive Afrocentric school can bring to all children. The panelists today are comprised of accomplished business entrepreneur, health specialists, and renowned scholars, each representing the strong foundation of the Sankofa Community Academy. But before our moderators begin, I would like to share the dedicated behind the scenes governance board members, as I could not have done this work without them.
Anita Cruz, Esquire, Dr. Kenneth Jackson, Rebecca Swenson, FNP, BSN,
Ms. Adwa Asentu, Mr. Anderson J. Lattimore, Dr. Monica L. Cummings,
Mr. Paul Myers, Dr. Maureen Carvin, Ms. Velia Gomez,
and Dr. Molefe Kete Asante.
And we would like to give a special thank you to Heidi Helgeson, who is a part of our administrative support team with Sankofa Community Academy. She has contributed much to our work, so thank you, Heidi.
So, as stated earlier, the purpose of the summit is to provide the community with greater insight into the foundation of Sankofa Community Academy. We are having a panel presentation because each member of the panel has keen insight into Afrocentric schooling, the impacts that having an Afrocentric curriculum and pedagogy can have on a community, and what people can do in a community to help found and support such an academy for themselves. There are many questions that have been raised over time as we have shared this work with the community, and we're very happy to have this opportunity to dive pretty deeply into the foundation of the academy.
So now we're going to present our panelists for today. And again, I just want to mention that as we go throughout the session, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. If there is a question that you would like to direct to a specific panelist, please include their name in your question. So for our panel today, we have Ms. Karen Hudson, Auburn Drive High School, nationally recognized principal of Nova Scotia. Vicki Seaback, small business consultant, Women's Business Initiative Corporation.
Dr. Molefe Kete Asante, professor of Africology and African American Studies at Temple University, and the founder of the Afrocentric schooling movement. Dr. Tanya Hudson, mathematics, statistics, and elementary education, creator of a math curriculum, and she's from Fayetteville State University.
Next, we have Rebecca Swenson, FNP, Wellness and Trauma Informed Care Specialist, UW Milwaukee and UW Madison. Dr. Tricia J. Baker, Haven Middle School Vice Principal, Afrocentric Curriculum on Reading.
And Dr. Christine Sleeter, Multicultural Education and Ethnic Studies at California State University.
We would also like to share the published works of our panelists along with our founder. All of these works are available on Amazon. So we have Transformative Ethnic Studies in Schools, Curriculum, Pedagogy, and Research by Christine Sleeter. Revolutionary Pedagogy, Primer for Teachers of Black Children by Dr. Malefe Kente Asate.
The Effects of Afrocentric Curriculum on Reading Scores of African American 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders by Dr. Tricia Baker. African American Firsts in Wisconsin from 1600 to 2006, Andrea Bell Myers. And the Gloria Ladson Billings Reader, which is an edited work of the works of Gloria Ladson Billings, edited by Patry, Hudson, Gray, and James. And of course, Dr. Tanya Hudson is one of the editors.
All right, now we're gonna get into our panel discussion. And we just wanted to show our attendees the questions that we have for today, but I'm actually gonna stop sharing this screen so that we can see our panelists as they answer the questions. Our first question, how did you come into this work? And we would like to direct that question to Dr. Schleter to start.
Thank you. And before I respond to the question, I would just really like to congratulate Andrea on the wonderful work that she's done in bringing to fruition the dream that she had that I think is so important of founding a school centered on Afrocentric education for the students of the community. How I came to the work actually goes back a long time ago when I was on a teacher preparation program designed to prepare teachers for urban schools. Obviously, I'm white and grew up in an all-white community, but spent as a part of that program, it was a community-based program in Seattle, and spent 8 months assigned to a very racially diverse high school in Seattle. And it was in the context of being there and realizing the huge gap between where I was coming from and where I had grown up and the realities of the kids in the schools that I was working, that I started on what actually became a lifetime of growing and learning. And part of that was, for me, centered around reading what I later came to realize were books that were rooted in ethnic studies. And that was a reading program that I started doing just because I felt so ignorant of where I was that I've never quit doing. But I think it was the personal relationships of people initially in Seattle, but then later on through the various work that I had and was doing over time, including teaching in the teacher education program where I met Andrea, who was one of the students in a program that Dr. Barbara Shade had developed for recruiting and preparing teachers of color. And that program, and working with you, Andrea, and the other students in the program was also one of the things that for me became a turning point in seeing what teachers of color can do to actually transform the profession. And so I think that's actually what we're seeing today in terms of you founding this school.
All right, next we can have Miss Vicky Seaback.
Well, I'm going to admit right up front that I'm sort of a newbie at this. I was introduced to Andrea through a longtime friend, Rebecca Swenson, who we had sons the same exact age who started kindergarten together. So we have been friends for a long time, since our sons will be 30. So besides dating us and telling what age we are, Rebecca, I apologize for that. Rebecca introduced me to Andrea, and honestly, I have to say, I have learned a lot in the 3 conversations that I have had with Andrea. Andrea and I have almost said we were sisters from another mister. We realized so much that we have in common. I have been a business owner and entrepreneur for 27 years and recently have acquired a coaching position for small businesses through WIBIC, which is the Wisconsin Women's Business Initiative Corp. WIBIC has been working with women, businesses, minority, and underserved for over 30 years. So Andrea and I have been talking as really on the business end of things, and we have had absolutely wonderful conversations, and I have to say I am honored to be here. So that is how I have come into this program, and thank you.
Thank you. Next we'll have Miss Karen Hudson.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Andrea, and everyone who's on the call. I first want to say that I actually was introduced to the concept of Afrocentricity from the province of Nova Scotia by Dr. Malefi Asante, who's actually on the call today. He's an honorary Nova Scotian to us, so he came to Nova Scotia in 1992, and he spoke to us about that concept of Afrocentricity. And from that time there, we've been following his work and actually trying to infuse it within our school and within our community. So I came to this work of trying to infuse Afrocentricity within mathematics by looking at the data within our school. And what I noticed is that most of our students who are of African ancestry, they basically were in the lower level of math. So what we try to do is that if that's going to be a case, they said we have to try to do things differently. So we said, we got to try something in terms of changing what people may think that may not work will actually work by grounding our children in their history, their own lived realities. And that's how I came to do the work in terms of centering our children in who they are so that they could understand how the mathematics is powerful and that it can change the way we analyze and the way that we do work. And so that was one of the things we did. Now, I didn't have a math background. I have a social science background, but I have a love for our people. And that love for my people and the understanding of the importance of our culture pushed me to reach out to my sister, who's on this call, Dr. Tanya Hudson, who has a math degree and in mathematics. And I reached out to her and I said, how can we change the curriculum so that our children can see themselves and feel that even though individual may think that we were pushing them to lower standards, we're going to push them to the higher standards, because that's what the Afrocentricity is all about, is grounding our children in who they are so that they can realize their potential.
Thank you, Dr. Hudson. Next, we'll have Dr. Tanya Hudson.
Thank you. So Karen already alluded to the fact that we started this process or this involvement number of years ago. And when I first met Dr. Asante, I was just in high school, but there was just a charge of what he was teaching us and what he was saying in the conversations that we were exposed to that made me want to learn more about myself, and just I already came to love who I was as an African Nova Scotian. 20 years later, 20 years ago, I transitioned to North Carolina and studied here, became an assistant principal. I taught math for 10 years at the school. And then after becoming assistant principal, I decided to get my doctorate in ed leadership. So from there, I went to an HBCU, a historically Black college and university. And we are constantly doing research my background is in mathematics, but my love for my people, as Karen stated, is that something that I see all the time on my campus. We're constantly collaborating with my colleagues. We teach because we want our students to be exposed to educational information as it relates to culturally responsive and culturally relevant pedagogy. So I was like, how do I take the theoretical part and connect these two things? And so when Karen reached out to me to do some of this work, I was very ecstatic and I was honored because I'm from Nova Scotia. I already have the background of Nova Scotians, our history and our culture, and my degree is in mathematics. So I just merged in the two together so that I would be able to expose our students to how they teach mathematics to a diverse community in the schools that we service here in Cumberland County. The Afrocentric approach is us looking at the curriculum aspect, collaborating with students, collaborating with teachers, but it's an ongoing project. It's an ongoing work and partnership, and it's taking that math and putting it into the culture instead of doing it the other way around. And it's basically from research and being a part of a college that allows us to do this consistently.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Dr. Malefe Kente Asate.
Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be on this panel, and I want to certainly congratulate Andrea for her diligence and her determination and stamina and energy, and you can't say no to to Andrea. So I just want to tell her thank you so much for this initiative, because this is the way it happens. It only happens when you have people who have the initiative to go out and to make it happen. I know this is true with all of the Afrocentric schools. And the Hudsons from Nova Scotia know exactly how this happens, because they have been integral to the work that we have done in Halifax. They are truly grounded in this. So let me just start with a sort of a simple statement. Most African, and I was born in Georgia, for those of you who want to know where I came from. Georgia, grew up in Tennessee, Texas, Oklahoma, California, worked in New York, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. So that's, and Africa, Zimbabwe. So here's my take on this. When African people were brought from the continent of Africa, we came to the Americas in our head, in our memories, with many things. But when we got here, much of what we knew was taken away from us. So much so that from the very beginning, our names were taken. So we didn't get off the boat with the names that we ended up with. We got off the boat with African names. And African names meant something. They all had meanings. And not only did they have meanings, but they told us our genealogy. They gave us our background. They understood where our families came from. If I were to give you my name as Adewale, you knew right away that I was a Yoruba. If I gave you my name and I said, my name is Emeka, you knew right away that that's an Igbo name. You knew we knew who we were, and we knew a lot about ourselves. But at least for those of us in North America, 250 years or so of the enslavement basically not only separated us physically, but separated us mentally from our own history and our own culture. And consequently, since the liberation of Black people in the 19th century, we have begun the fight for reconstruction. That is, how do we really get back to at least a place where we are no longer disoriented? Because what Europe did was to disorient us. And not only disorient us, but to dislocate us from all the concepts that were African concepts, all the ideas that we had, that our ancestors for thousands of years have created. So the Afrocentric idea is this, that to teach a Black child, you must center that child in a narrative where she feels that she is the subject of the subject, that she is not somebody going to get somebody else's subject, but that math is hers. The Africans created geometry. The pyramids could not have been built without geometry. The annual flood of the Nile River constituted a way that people began to develop the calendar. So all math, at least for African people, ought to start with African civilizations. That's fundamental. If you're going to have an Afrocentric curriculum, then you've got to ground those children in the subject. If you start literature, you cannot assume that African people did not have writing. Writing starts in Egypt. So that's Egypt is in Africa. It's not in Asia. It's not in North America. It's not in Europe. Egypt is an African country. And the farther back in Egypt you go, the blacker it is. So now you got a problem. Here you got these Black children, and I did my DNA, right? My ancestors are from Nigeria and from Sudan. So here you got these Black children sitting in these classrooms in wherever here, and there is no mention at all of any relationship of the African people to knowledge. So that's a fundamental problem. And I remember sitting in elementary school thinking, well, they're talking about such and such and such in the Middle Ages, but the people in Africa must have been doing something during the 1400s or the 1500s. What was going on in Africa? But no teacher ever told me. I had to wait till I got to UCLA to learn for myself what Africa was doing. And that's why I wrote the book, The History of Africa, because I knew that many African American and African Canadian children didn't have these books. They didn't know. The teachers didn't know. And the people who taught us didn't know. So it's fundamental in the Afrocentric curriculum and in Afrocentric schools that children be grounded. And that's why when I went to Nova Scotia in the 1990s, this was my first time. First, I didn't even think that Black people live in Nova Scotia. What are all these Black people doing up here in Nova Scotia? And that's where I learned about how you can see things from different angles. Because you remember the Black people, many Black people, and this is why Karen and Tanya have North Carolina accents. I'm they're gonna laugh at that because their people came from they fought on the British side. Those folks fought on the British side, but most African Americans don't know that Black people fought for the loyalists. We all think they all fought for the rebels, for the white colonialists. No, they fought for their freedom. They knew they were told that if you fight for the king, you will get your freedom. But if you fight for these Americans, you're going to be enslaved forever. So they fought on the side of the British. And when the British were defeated, they got on ships and went on to Halifax, you see. And then later some went to Jamaica, some went to Sierra Leone. But that's how they got out of Virginia and North Carolina and America, because they were fighting on the side of the loyalists. And I say this because you find then that for Nova Scotia, there's a very powerful African history, African cultural history about the struggles of the people in Halifax and what they did and the whole province of Nova Scotia and how they created schools and so on. So you began to have some understanding of this notion of centeredness. Afrocentric is not against anybody. Afrocentric is simply that the African child or the child of African descent must be shown that she or he is a subject of history, not merely a victim, not merely on the margins of somebody else's experience, but somebody who actually did something. Now, most of our understanding in the American situation U.S. situation, we don't learn that way. If we learn about Lewis and Clark and their adventure going to the Pacific Ocean, we don't learn that there was an African with them by the name of York, and that African who was with them, and we only know this because of the diaries of the white people, Lewis and Clark, that African was one of the most important people in that entourage because he was the one who talked with the Native Americans, the First Nations. He could speak their language. Not only did he speak their language, but he saved the whole party from a bear. He killed a bear to save Lewis and Clark. So here's a centered notion. Therefore, when we talk about Lewis and Clark, for the African American child sitting in that classroom, you got to talk about York, and you got to know something about that. But if you just talk about Lewis and Clark, it's almost like, well, black people were not even involved, and of course they were central in one respect in terms of saving the lives of the team. So anyway, there are things like that. There are many things, and I'm just happy to be a part of this group. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Dr. Trisha J. Baker. And again, the question is, what brought you into this work?
Thank you very much. And again, I wanted to commend Miss Andrea for this awesome work. I much admire you, and I appreciate the opportunity to be connected with you through Miss Evans. And my work began from when I was pretty much young. My mom was in education, and as one of the classroom teachers, she was also involved in seeing our Black students in the special education classes all the time. And it was always students of color in those classrooms. And as I began to notice that, I myself attended middle school and high school where I was one Black child among all of my peers who were white. And then when I transferred to my undergraduate studies at Alcorn State, to the all-Black school, historical Black college, I had a bit of a culture shock because having been immersed in middle school and high school, being one Black child out of 300 some in my class, I adapted to that environment. You know, I was listed to white songs and did what white girls did because that's what I was used to. When I went to Alcorn State and was immersed in our Black culture, I thought I was Black enough, but I had a culture shock, and I had to really adjust my mindset to being around Black people 24/7, which was different for me. But I'm grateful for the opportunity to have had both experiences as well. As a special education teacher, this is my 20-something year of being a special ed teacher, and now as an administrator, my classes always consisted of kids of color, primarily. I had a white student here and there, but primarily those students that I had and worked with were students of color. And I always noticed that my students, as I talked to my colleagues about how to plan and issues that my colleagues saw them having in classes, and they would be asking me, well, what are you doing to make them successful? And I'm like, I'm just connecting to my students. I'm relating to them as a Black teacher. I am getting down on their level and I'm meeting them where they are. And it was always these issues among my colleagues. And I always told my students, and someone mentioned about, I wanted my students to know that they were special, that no matter the label that was put upon them by any testing of any learning disabilities, that they can learn, and they had no excuse not to learn. And so I always pushed my students, I always challenged my students, and I gave them no excuse for not doing well. And I tried my best to let them see again that they're special, and to not let anything or anybody tell them otherwise, and not to prove them right in their behaviors. And so now again, as we see where we are now, and the gap was also a concern of mine. The gap has not closed in the years that it has been there. And I always wondered about the curriculum. Again, are our students seeing themselves in the curriculum, seeing themselves as being successful? As a Black educator, I wanted them to see me as being a successful person. I didn't get to be a teacher or an administrator just by osmosis. I did go through some things. I was challenged to get where I am, but that they too can take those adversities that they've had experienced and be able to overcome them and be the best that they can be. So I appreciate Ms. Andrea pushing this work to really enlighten our students. I appreciate this panel as well, saying, you know, our kids can learn, and let's present a platform but that they can prosper, because they can. And so I appreciate that opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. And last, we'll have Rebecca Swinson.
Good afternoon. Thank you, and it's an honor to be here. I really came to this work because of Andrea. Andrea and I have known each other for quite a few years and have actually done a lot of diversity and inclusion work together. And one of the most powerful takeaway messages that I had years ago from a diversity conference was one way to be a true ally to people of color. And that message was that people who are members of communities of color really need or really know what they need to bring about systemic change and improve their lives. And they don't necessarily need white rescuers or white ideas. So my idea is when a person of color asks me to participate in a project or a program, I figure out a way to say yes, because I believe that they know and they understand what they need. And then I can go about, saying, yes, I agree to participate in this, and what can I do to help? So, so that's what being an ally means to me, and that's really what brought me to this work. In addition, of course, to my love for Andrea and her enthusiasm and her absolute dedication to this idea and sticking with it over these past few years.
Thank you. All right, our second question. Maureen, did you want to share that one with the panelists?
Certainly. So we've already started to have some discussion on this question. The question is what are some common misconceptions about Afrocentric school models? So this particular question is directed to first Dr. Asante.
Thank you very much. I want to start by saying that I must have anticipated a part of this question earlier because one of the things that people say is that Afrocentric education, or say Afrocentric education, means that all you're doing is replacing the Eurocentric education with Afrocentric education. And I normally have to explain that there's a real difference between Eurocentric and Afrocentric, that they are not counterparts of each other. The Eurocentric experience, there's nothing wrong with Eurocentric experience, actually, except, and this is the exception that makes a real big difference, except that it is imposed on a multicultural society as if it is universal. In other words, the Eurocentric worldview is a particular worldview. It's almost like when people used to say, when white people would go to Africa, and missionaries, and they would tell people, you got to have a Christian name. So you got to give up your name of Adewale and you got to become John, because otherwise your name doesn't go with your religion. But there's no such thing as a Christian name. What they're doing is taking the African cultural name and giving you a European cultural name. So this happens throughout that whole Eurocentric experience, because you take the particular experience of Europe and you enlarge it to be a universal experience for everybody. So if you ask, what are the concepts of beauty? The concepts of beauty become concepts of the European experience, not concepts of the African experience. So Afrocentricity says, no, we're not a counterpart. We're not the opposite of Eurocentricity. What we are about is about African experiences in African history and culture and African knowledge, not to impose Afrocentricity on everybody in the world. That's not the idea. And that has never been an African idea. The African idea, however, is that culture matters. The culture of Native Americans matter. The culture of Mexican Americans matter. Culture matters. Puerto Ricans matter. This is important. Asian Americans matter. Those cultures matter. And the children ought to at least be taught from we say sometimes say culturally relevant, but I always like to say, you name the cultures. And that's why I don't use the word people of color, because that doesn't name anything to me. If you're talking about African Americans, say African Americans. If you're talking about Mexican Americans, say Mexican Americans. There's nothing wrong in talking about that. If you're talking about Euro Americans or white Americans, say that. That's extremely important, because otherwise what you end up doing is minimizing the cultural experiences of people. And you can't do that. They're not the same. They have different experiences. So the notion that Afrocentricity is somehow a counterpart to a Eurocentric expression where, people will say, well, what Sankofa wants to do is to take away all the European knowledge and put in all African knowledge. That is not true. And that is not the concept of Afrocentric education. In fact, Afrocentric education is a way for us to actually give students more information, and they acquire information. I think Dr. Baker had made an excellent point about her own educational experience. There's nothing wrong with having all these educational experiences, because what happens is that you know more. You are able to relate to human beings as human beings in a different way. I used to say 20 years ago, I would much rather, if I were a white person, I would much rather meet a black person who knew her history or her culture than to meet a black person who didn't know his or her culture. Because a person who knows his or her culture has a deeper and a richer sense of what humanity is about. Normally that happens, you see? So I think it's extremely important that we do this. So that's just one of the aspects. There are many, and I don't want to just take up all the time, but certainly that's true. Thank you. That's one we have to work on and make sure that that's not what we're about. We're about centering the children in the knowledge, their own historical experiences. And you can teach a child to read or to write by using the children's own stories and the stories of their people. Learning to read or learning to write doesn't have to be Eurocentric stories or European stories. They could be African stories. It's just learning to read or learning to write. That's the basis. That's what we're trying to do. So let the child feel a sense that he or she is a participant and not a spectator, but a participant in knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there another panelist who'd like to pick up on this and continue with the question? If not, I'll call on someone.
Well, Dr. Maleffi said it in terms of, being a participant, not a spectator. One of the misconceptions that our school and even our Center for Education thought that when we were starting the Afrocentric math, that we weren't aligned with the curriculum, but it did the opposite. Like Dr. Santi said, it actually provides more for everyone. It benefits the whole child. So one of the concepts is that they were thinking that we were separating, but actually we weren't. We never even used the word. So we had to try to get them to understand those misunderstandings, those misconceptions, that the students were pushing themselves. We were lifting each other as we went along. We were learning how to give, like passing the torch, passing the information, centering themselves in terms of understanding the narrative. So they were doing the curriculum. They were doing more than the curriculum because they were learning about themselves where they never had a chance to learn about themselves because they never got to have that within the early elementary, junior high, and now presently within the senior high. So that was one of the biggest ones in terms of not aligning with the curriculum. It does more than that. It aligns with the curriculum.
Thank you. Dr. Sleater?
Something that I sometimes hear, and this kind of goes along with what Karen was saying, is that an Afrocentric curriculum is not intellectually rigorous and not intellectually challenging. Actually, I've heard that about various ethnic studies curriculum from people who don't know what they're talking about. And I think use that as a way of trying to disparage works that they just really don't understand. Because an Afrocentric curriculum, the regular Eurocentric curriculum for a whole lot of African American kids and Mexican American kids, indigenous kids, is actually what's not intellectually rigorous, the way, especially the way it's taught by teachers who don't believe in the intellectual ability of the kids they have in the classroom. And what an Afrocentric curriculum really tries to do is to ignite the intellectual abilities and curiosities and wonderings that kids have and build on those in the classroom. The research review that I did of the effects of ethnic studies on students overwhelmingly finds that students learn, achieve better with an ethnic studies of however you define that curriculum and approach, as well as develop a sense of who they are, a sense of personal empowerment, better than they do in the traditional Eurocentric schooling experience.
Are there any other panelists that would like to speak on that question? Misconceptions of Afrocentric school models?
I'll just add this note as well. I feel that sometimes it's a thought of power and being overtaken, taking away someone's power to do something. And that again is not the case. That definitely is the intention to expand and allow all of our students to grow. So it's not just only for the Black students or students of color. It is for all students to be able to grow at whatever pace they need to be able to be the best they can be.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to our next question. How are African-centered school models beneficial to the whole community? And we'll start by directing this question to Dr. Tanya Hudson.
Well, one of the things that I noticed when I started collaborating with Karen and her school, we actually did Skype. And so I met with the teacher. We looked at his curriculum and aligned his curriculum with the mathematics that I was about to teach. So I start digging into the research and I start looking at how am I going to expose this, because it's high school and I teach, I prepare students at the elementary level. How is it going to allow these students to be engaged and to be a part, to be problem solvers and to be thinkers as it relates to their history and their culture, and in putting that mathematics in it. Well, when we started building those opportunities for the students, the thing I saw most of all was they started coming to class. They were excited about being there. They started asking their teacher, can we have more sessions with me? And I did not want to take away from what the teacher was doing, but obviously there was something that they were getting because I was exposing them to their history and their culture and making them feel like that this was their classroom and they were owning it, that they were starting to love and appreciate the math, because they hated going to math class. They were just like, they hated math. They didn't understand how important math was and that it's everywhere. And so as soon as they started seeing, we start talking about Harriet Tubman, we start talking about Citadel Hill, and I was putting in Pythagorean theorem and how it was relating to it. As soon as they start seeing all of those pieces and I was telling it like a story, it became so real to them that they started to love being in the math classroom. So benefit is that you're going to have students that are going to be citizens that are confident and that are going to want to go to school and learn, so that when they leave the school building, you have them working and they're not sitting in a community just hanging out on the street as they perceive that's all we do as a culture when we're not in school, we're not being educated. So you're going to have students who are proud about themselves and they speak how proud they are about themselves because they know more about who they are as individuals. So you're building a holistic child, just like Andrea said. That's what Sankofa Academy is about. You're not just trying to expose students to, here's a little bit of culture, now go ahead and you just do what you need to do. You're building every component and piece so that that student leaves feeling empowered and developed, and that they know who they are as an individual. And so we're not just giving them a job, or giving them an opportunity for a future. So that's how I believe it's going to be beneficial to the whole community, because if they grow, we grow, you know, they grow, we grow.
So our next question, how would the 3-pillar approach to health and wellness address the unique needs of children who come from communities of color? And we would like to direct that question to start with Rebecca Swenson.
Hi, Thanks again, honored to be here. My background as a family nurse practitioner and psychiatric nurse practitioner combined with about 20 years working as a school nurse has given me some pretty unique insights into the health needs of kids, and sometimes particularly children in African American and Latinx communities. So to that end, myself and Paul Bell Myers and Dr. Monica Cummings got together and put together the 3-pillar approach to health that will become part of the Sankofa community. Pillar 1 being nutrition, Pillar 2 being physical education, and Pillar 3 being mental health. Historically, communities of color have been disproportionately affected by health problems such as diabetes, hypertension, and in fact, Wisconsin is one of the few northern states that about 4 years ago elected not to expand Title XIX and Medicaid coverage. And as a result, about twice as many people, African American people in Wisconsin, are uninsured than their white counterparts, and they also traditionally spend a lot more money for health care. And this, of course, combined with the effects of systemic racism, drive those rates of hypertension, diabetes, and obesity up and up. So one of the things that Sankofa proposes is a very robust physical education program that focuses almost exclusively on cardiovascular health. This is a health education program called CATCH. It's been well researched, it's based in cardiovascular health, and its emphasis is on movement. Versus the more traditional skill and drill PE programs that we have in schools where you learn how to play baseball. But when you're learning how to play baseball, most of you are sitting down, right? So the CATCH program really focuses on getting kids moving and getting their cardiovascular rates up for at least 30 minutes every day. Now, in addition to CATCH, the physical education component is a very robust nutritional component too, and teaches kids how to identify and select healthy foods based on a very easy system of green, yellow, and red, and teaches kids about go slow and no foods and how to select, combine, and utilize those on a daily basis to maximize physical health. Now, along with that part of the nutritional component, we would also like to draw on some resources available from an organization called Soulfire Farms in upstate New York. Is anybody on the call familiar with them? Soulfire Farms? It's an African American owned organization, husband and wife, who host conferences and learning weekends to connect children, African American, Indigenous, and Latino children and adults, to reconnect them to agriculture and reconnect them to their traditional practices of agriculture. There's, particularly in the African American community, there's been a disconnect between agriculture because of the historical trauma around their involvement in agriculture. And so Soulfire Farms seeks to reconnect youth with agriculture, with fresh food, including harvesting, growing and harvesting and utilizing those foods. So we've actually been in communication with Soulfire Farms, and what they would do is they would come to Sankofa and they would host about a 3-day conference for all of the staff to kind of get everybody up and running on their philosophies and theories, and would help drive the community garden that we hope to bring to fruition. And then the last component is mental health. We really believe that mental health is on par with physical health, and we believe that it's one of the shortfalls in our public education system. We often rely on maybe one school social worker to take care of the needs of 600 or 700 children, and that ends up being you know, not a very robust response to whatever their mental health needs are. So it's our hope, and one of the reasons that we are doing the GoFundMe, to not only provide a school nurse, but to also have a school therapist and a school social worker to help plug kids into mental health resources within and without you know, the school. And part of that will be a very intentional mindfulness, meditation, and yoga program to help kids who are dealing with trauma to support them in centering and claiming their minds and bodies that will in turn help them, you know, focus on learning. So that, and I would defer in the future to Dr. Monica Cummings, who is going to be spearheading that component of the program. So I don't want to take up too much more time because I know we're running late. So if anybody has anything to add to or any questions, I'm happy to listen.
Then thank you, Rebecca. I think at this particular point that we're going to move into the question and answer portion of the summit. And the person who is leading that is Miss Heidi Helgeson, who is a retired special educator, administrative support, and the staunchest volunteer and support person for everybody as we're doing this work. So Heidi, thank you, and I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, Maureen. That's very kind. I would like to start with a question from Nick Petoskey, who is here on behalf, is one of our authorizers and is here. He posed a question that might be maybe Dr. Karen Hudson can begin to answer. In a society/community that often blindly accepts the status quo of our current education system, in quotes, in parentheses, maybe because they are unaware, what suggestions or what has worked in Nova Scotia to generate discussion that there are other models?
All right, thank you, Heidi. I don't have a doctrine yet, but if anybody would like to take me under their wing, so it's just Karen Hudson and Dr. Tanya Hudson. She may have something to say, but I could try to, if I could think about the question again, if you said, what suggestions to generate discussion that there are other models? Is that the question, Heidi?
Yes, and I think my interpretation, and please, I know Nick, you're here, you can clarify this, just unmute yourself and contribute. But perhaps just the pushback that has been given that, you know, people sometimes, again, as he said, are unaware that there are other models. How have you, in your experience, opened that up to not just your students, but faculty and the general community to help them see it and maybe be more accepting of an Afrocentric model?
Right. So I only, Nick, I only basically examined one model because the one that I knew of was the Afrocentric model for our children. But there's other ways, other models out there, because one that you could focus on, and I was focusing on the culture piece because that's a piece that resonated with me and also resonate with our children who are of African ancestry, African Nova Scotian. So I was focusing on them knowing who they are so that they could see themselves reflected and wouldn't feel invisible within Nova Scotia, wouldn't feel invisible within the culture that they live in. And so what we were trying to do is develop character, but also develop the culture. The culture and the identity piece was very important for me. But there are also models dealing with character development that you can merge those two together, where you could have culture, community, but also character. Because when you develop a character, when you develop a person's mind, you develop that whole concept of what they can do. We had pushback because don't think that everybody just bought into it. They didn't. There are people from higher up than me in terms of our Department of Education. I had to do presentations with them to get them on board so they could understand the philosophy and what we were trying to do. We were trying to move from that theoretical approach to the practical approach and how that could be implemented within our school system. So that's what we try to do in terms of making sure that they understood. So they were seeing it, and I think that Dr. Hudson alluded to the thing about the segregation and the separation. They were using the S words. There was no time that we used that word at all in terms of presentation. We talk about the importance of grounding children, grounding the whole child. And our children have not been grounded in their whole life in terms of who they are. We were trying to make sure that they understood that our children, that comes with this trauma. And I think Rebecca was talking about, I was listening when you talked about the well-being, the trauma of racism. That is nothing new. That has been something that's been going on. So we came from that point of view in terms of pushing about the historical baggage, the historical in terms of educational infrastructure that has been developed, the institutionalized in terms of what they could do. When we look at that legacy of slavery, and we did not want our children to feel that that was their only call. We were called for more than just that. And so that's where we are pushing them to. So the model that I can talk about, Nick, that I know about is the Afrocentric, because that's the part that resonated about culture and identity and making sure that they had a strong sense of who they are as individuals and as people of African Nova Scotians. I'm not sure if you want to say something, Dr. Hudson, the real Dr. Hudson.
You can call me Tanya. Well, one thing I was going to add, and Karen and I did this a lot, was documentation. Like every time we were documenting, anytime I zoomed in with her students, the lesson was documented, it was recorded, it was saved, it was used as data later on for maybe the Department of Education or whoever was funding them to look back and say, look at the students' progression, look how it's working. The model is a positive outcome for our students. And they were documenting our videos, those conversations, surveys to the students. You know, of course, they're watching their grades, watching, you know, their progress, talking to the students. So all of that, I guess, is required in order for people to buy in and believe that this is doable and it works and it's real. It's unfortunate that you just don't believe that our children need such a thing, but if we have the documentation to show and that these other models are out there in other schools that's working, then we have to use what we have, and then we have to be able to document and tell our story, because it does work as long as we have the information to go with it. So that was another thing that I wanted to say, is that we did document a lot. Mr. McNeil would always ask me for, you know, the lesson plans. I always create them in PowerPoint. I always made sure that he had access, and then he put them on his websites and on his Canvas site or whatever they use, whatever their learning management system is. But that documentation is part of the process as well. And I think that's what was needed to help the students, or to help the higher up buy in to continuing to fund or support, you know, Kieran's school and what they had going on. So I hope that answers.
Yeah, I just want to say something. That's a good point, Tanya, is because the documentation, but what we had to do is that we could actually look at the data. I said initially that we start with the data piece, so we actually could look at the numbers. We actually took how many of our students went in the lower level math and basically developed graphs of it to show them how they were from grade 9 to grade 10 to grade 11 and now to grade 12. We could also show them from this whole process that we're doing with our Afrocentric math cohort, is that we had more students taking advanced placement AP than we ever had. We had zero. We had zero, but this year, well, actually last year, we had 7 students from African Nova Scotia actually take an advanced placement. We never had that before. In terms of chemistry, we never had that before. And that was also in terms of fundamentally understanding that, looking at the map, but I also want to go to Dr. Tricia. She talked about the reading. That whole literacy piece became part of it as well, because when you look at the whole concept, the whole child, you're looking at also literacy and mathematics, because you know that they are powerful tools that will engage our children and propel our children to do more. And so this is what we were trying to do, to make sure that they understood. So when you look at the data from year to year, which we had to present to continue going, and then when people could see it, and then students were actually feeling and saying, I want to continue in the class together. I didn't want to be separated, because Dr. Tricia said, and my sister can say, and maybe some others, we were only the one person in the class. So when you're the only person in the class, you feel that you're not capable. You don't raise your hand, you don't speak out, you actually are silent. And so here is an opportunity for the children who were silent to become unsilent and speak out and challenge themselves, because they felt amongst the peers, they felt comfortable, they felt that each of us there were supporting each other. We had each other's back. So we did have that, Heidi, in terms of making sure we keep track of it, the data, we keep track of making, in terms of getting others on board to understand what we're trying to do.
Yeah, Dr. Tricia Baker, could you speak on that quick? I know you have another appointment reading. That was your specialty.
Yeah, I was going to jump in here. But in terms of, I heard the question about acceptance of what the ACC kind of stands for. I don't know if we can necessarily expect everyone to accept ACC. I think what Andrea is doing is pushing through in spite of that. And this is where we have to really become radical educators and just really push through. And in terms of evidence, you know, again, the questioning of, well, what is ACC? Well, when we show the data that shows that it does work based on my doctoral research, we looked at MAP scores and we looked at DRA scores. Everyone is about data nowadays. And over a 3-year period, statistically, my data show through DRA and MAP scores that those Black children who are in ACC did better than those students who are not in ACC. And so there's your evidence right there. So in terms of trying to prove to someone something, well, to convince someone, that's the challenge, but we're going to continue to push through as well. Another thing too, in terms of what I was looking for as far as the cultural connection that our students have in the curriculum, and to be able to ground themselves and see themselves in the curriculum. And like Ms. Hudson said, Ms. Karen Hudson, when they're able to see themselves and be immersed in similar students of backgrounds, they do feel more comfortable and more at ease to be able to reflect and to expand on their thinking, and to be able to touch on those areas of modeling and building character amongst themselves. And so, again, the data is there. It is evident that it's there, and we just have to push through and make it happen, and not be fazed by the voices, because they're going to be there and it's not going to stop. So we're going to push through.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else that would like to share? I do have a couple more questions if we can fit them in, and folks I know are moving on as they have other commitments. We did have believe the name is pronounced Tiffany Brown, and I believe she has left the meeting, but her question was, what framework will be applied for students with different learning styles? And I think we've got a whole passel of educators who do that every day in their classroom. Not sure who would be.
Dr. Sleater, you want to take this one?
I'm sorry. I have another commitment, and I was just typing a note saying I'm sorry. I'm going to leave because I have another commitment that I have to run for.
No worries, no worries.
Hi, it's Karen Evans here, and I am speaking as a veteran educator, and I would like to emphasize that every child has a unique learning style. This is not just peculiar to any type of child or any child of any culture, and the way that it is addressed is by getting to know your students. And I think that this is going to provide a very unique opportunity for us in Sankofa to get to know students individually. And based on knowing the individual interests and aptitudes of students, then you certainly can address their their learning styles. So I just wanted to make that point very clear that the job of an educator is to get to know what those specific learning needs and learning styles of kids are, and to be able to specifically address them. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that was very well said, Karen. Would anyone else like to share
I
a
would.
perspective?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Tanya.
I could briefly state that I work, like I said, in an educational preparation program. And one of the main things, I mean, our students have numerous courses that align with differentiated instruction and dealing with students with diversity and disabilities and that whole thing. So like Karen said, it's an expectation that if you're becoming an educator, you have to build rapport with your students and know their learning styles and know how you're going to deliver instruction for all your students, not just your Afrocentric students, not just your Black students, but all students, regardless if they're in the Sankofa school or if they're in a regular, school out in a public school. So it's just a requirement when you're building students and you're working for students to become an educator. So that's all I wanted to add.
Yes, I just want to say, she said public. Sankofa is an independent public charter school. So just want to make sure we get that in there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. We are coming on. This is a question I think gets asked a lot, and I know that the board and Andrea have faced this, whether it's been asked directly or not directly. But I think it's important to ask the question because I think it is something that ends up having to be defended. And I'm not necessarily sure I agree with why it has to be defended, but or that it does have to be defended. The question is, how does Afrocentricity benefit white students?
Actually, I'm just going to take it from Dr. Malefe Kente Asante. This question was actually posed to him when we had a conversation about this, and that, it's a story about humanity, right? And so when we speak to humanity, we're speaking to everyone, right? It's inclusive, it's absolutely inclusive if we're speaking about humanity. And when we do it in this manner and we talk about Africa as the origin and tell the story from the beginning, we automatically have everyone included in the narrative. And so this is definitely a benefit to European students and students everywhere, because unfortunately, as he mentioned earlier, he spoke about Lewis and Clark. I just taught Lewis and Clark last week, and I literally had my kids write in their history book, York. And we went and spoke about Sacagawea. And we had a very robust discussion as to, why certain people are in the history book and why certain people aren't in the history book. So it benefits all children, no matter their ethnicity, no matter their race, no matter their color, their skin, no matter where they live in the world.
Okay, thank you. I think based on time, we're going to go ahead and wrap up our question portion, and if we can return to our moderators to conclude the presentation, I would appreciate that. Thank you all for your questions.
So for the sake of time, because we are getting close to 2 o'clock, we're gonna jump to our fundraising crowdfunding portion with Vicki Seaback.
Thanks, Ottawa. All right, so we're really going to get down to the heart of this, aren't we, right away. First of all, I want to say what an honor it is to be a small part in this necessary mission to educate our children through the stories of history, all cultures' history. We've all been brought together to share this passion for education and to look at this wonderful teaching model to give hope for educational diversity. I've been enlightened just in this last 45 minutes listening to everybody. Thank you so much for being here and dedicating your time to this. It is our time. It is our time to take action. We are so happy to have this opportunity in our Kenosha community to be able to make a difference to everybody here. It's time, though, to talk about money. We are Sankofa is a 501c3 organization and is applying for a grant through the Division of Public Education out of Madison. And that grant is an $800,000 grant. We have set up a GoFundMe to match that grant. Thank you so much to Andrea for having this dream and being able to start this whole thing rolling. I'm here to really sort of be the cheerleader for this team, and also for us to think about the energy of money and how that energy can actually make such a huge difference. I want everybody to feel with their hearts and use their pocketbooks to go forward and help this mission. This is the link for the Community Academy's fundraising campaign. And as you can see, there is a Donate Now button along with a Share button. So this is the time for all of us to open this up to our friends, our family, organizations that we might know who would like to partner in a mission as this for Sankofa. If you have any questions at all, you can reach out to Andrea. She can answer anything for you. And again, this is the start of really something just fantastic in our Kenosha community. And I am really blessed to be a part of this and to be learning from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. I'm also going to put some links in the chat. The links are going to be to our GoFundMe page as well as our Facebook page. And I also included a recent article written by the Journal Times on Sankofa Community Academy. So be sure to click on those links and share them with people you know. Okay, thank you so much again to our attendees and our prestigious panelists. This discussion was very engaging, and we look forward to having more virtual summits. Well, as long as there's a pandemic, things will be virtual. So we look forward to having more summits like this in the future. Again, we will be posting this recording on YouTube. That link will be posted on our Facebook page. Once we have a website, it will be posted there as well. And I also shared those links again in the chat. So please make sure to visit those links and to share them with people that you know.
And just really quick, Etowah, if you do go just to GoFundMe and you don't have the link, you can search as Sankofa Community Kenosha, and it will come up then. So you can find it that way too.
Thank you, Vicki. And Andrea or Maureen, would you like to add anything in closing?
Just want to.
I just want to, I'm sorry, I just want to say thank you absolutely to everyone who participated and joined this Sankofa Summit today. I was really always looking forward to it. You know, you have to have something to look forward to considering everything we're going through with the pandemic. So this was one of the things I did most definitely look forward to. So thank you. I appreciate you guys. Love